Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where freedom is a joke and your name doesn't matter. Welcome to being a Viking slave. You wake up, gagged cold and spread-eagled on the rough wooden deck of a longship, the salty spray stinging your eyes. Your wrists and ankles chafed raw by coarse ropes you can barely move. Around you, the hulking Vikings grunt and bicker their boots, clomping as the ship cuts through icy waters. Somewhere beneath the deck, rats skitter and squeak, eyeing you like a snack. The sharp tang of fish sweat and wood smoke hangs thick in the air. You're pretty sure the Vikings consider you less than a beast, maybe dinner. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location, and the time you're tuning in below it helps me know who's crazy enough to join this voyage. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You try to squint past the fog of sea spray and the gag stuffing your mouth. Your limbs scream from the cold and the harsh bindings. The sun's a pale smear in the gray sky, just barely warming the wooden planks that creak beneath you. Around you, rough hands haul in heavy ropes, the men shouting orders in a guttural tongue you barely understand. You're a living tool, a burden chained and bound. Vikings prized strength and freedom, but you're just property. Slavery in Viking times wasn't some distant sanitized concept. You're thrall, a slave in Old Norse, captured in raids born into servitude or traded from faraway lands. Your body is the spoils of war, your spirit shackled tighter than your wrists. No laws protect you. The Viking world views you as less than a free man, no rights, no hope, and certainly no voice. Here's a grim fact: thralls made up about a third of some Viking communities. That's a lot of people trapped in this cold, brutal existence. They worked farms, rowed ships, cleaned homes, and sometimes fought in battles when needed. But mostly, they suffered silently. But it's not just hard labor. Your captors believe you're cursed or marked by fate. And some think thralls have strange powers like the ability to see the future or carry bad luck, which means you get blamed for bad harvests, bad weather, or the odd broken sword. Talk about being scapegoated. Historians still argue whether thralls were ever able to buy freedom, or if that was just a fairy tale whispered to keep hope alive. Some records hint at manumission slaves earning or being granted release, but most likely few lived long enough or earned enough trust to taste it. You try to shift, but the rough rope bites deep into your skin. The ship pitches, tossing you sideways. You cough through the gag, tasting salty sea and sweat. Above the deck, a Viking laughs a loud, booming sound that reminds you this is their world, and you're the prisoner in it. The ship smells of rotting fish and stale ale. The wood is splintered and slick with salt. Rats skitter past your feet, fearless and hungry. They've made their home here among the thralls and cargo. Their tiny claws scrabble over the planks, always hunting for scraps or something softer. Did you know Vikings sometimes kept cats aboard to control the rat population? But those cats rarely cared about thralls after all. You're not much different from a rat in their eyes. Easy prey in the shadows. Your mind drifts to the thought of the gods these men worship. Odin, Thor. Freya, fearsome beings with thunder war and death on their lips. But you're probably more likely to pray to whichever god might get you out of this mess alive. If you even have time to pray. And here's an open question for you. Did Viking slaves have their own beliefs, or were they forced to adopt the Norse pantheon? Archaeologists have found mixed clues, but no clear answer yet. The wind picks up, tugging at the sails and sending shivers down your spine. You glance sideways there. A shadow moves fast. Another thrall chained nearby glares with eyes full of despair and hatred. You exchange a brief, silent glance, an unspoken bond, forged in misery. Tonight, the sea will be cold. The stars will be indifferent. And you're just a prisoner fighting to survive another endless day on the Viking ship. The dawn cracks open over the horizon. But there's no beauty in this sunrise, just another brutal day of toil ahead. Your muscles ache as you're hauled up from the deck's cold embrace and shoved toward the oar benches. Row someone growls, though it might as well be a thunderclap. You scramble into position, your hands raw and blistered from yesterday's labor, your throat sore from coughing salt and sweat. Your body protests every movement, but you're just a tool, an endless source of power for the Viking war machine. You grip the oar slick with salt water and grime and pull. The rhythm, each stroke a sentence in a cruel sermon, no mercy, no rest. Your arms burn, lungs burn, and all the while the men above shout orders and insults, making it clear you're less than human. You're not a warrior. You're barely a person, just muscle expendable and replaceable. This grueling rowing wasn't just to get from point A to B. The Vikings depended on slaves like you to propel their ships faster than the enemy could react. Their raids, their pillages, their legends of fearsome warriors, they all hinged on thralls, dragging oars through icy waters. Without you, their world would grind to a halt. Here's a hard fact. Viking longships could reach speeds up to 15 knots with full rowing power. That meant slaves worked at peak exhaustion, often for hours in freezing conditions. Hypothermia wasn't just a risk, it was a likely outcome if you slowed down. But wait, it gets worse. While you row, some Vikings debate whether thralls even qualify as people. A popular notion was that thralls lacked souls, or had diminished ones, making it easier for their masters to justify cruelty. Imagine rowing harder, knowing your life's value is being argued over like livestock. Historians still argue about this. Some believe thralls had limited rights in Viking society. Others say they were mere property. The truth probably depends on who you asked and what mood they were in. Your hands slip on the oar. The wet wood bites into your palms. Rats dart around your feet, daring to nibble at your toes if you're not quick. At night, these vermin become your closest companions and worst enemies. You remember the stories whispered among thralls. Some claimed rats would actually protect you from worse things like the plague, or worse. But mostly, they just remind you how low you've sunk. Speaking of strange Viking slaves, were often tattooed or branded to mark ownership. Sometimes it was a simple symbol, sometimes something gruesome. This was both to discourage escape and to remind the thrall that their body was no longer theirs. It's a mark of shame you carry every day. You gasp for breath, lungs burning, and steal a glance at the crew. They're a chaotic blur of sweat scars and brutal laughter. One burly Viking winks at you as if you're a joke he's just told. You want to remind him, you're the one who might drown if you can't keep rowing. But the gag and the exhaustion win. As the ship cuts through waves, you try not to think about the food waiting below deck. Last night's rotten fish heads and stale bread. It's the kind of meal that can either keep you barely alive or send you to the grave. Hunger and disease are constant companions in this life. Oh, and did you know that Vikings sometimes ate fermented shark? It's the kind of delicacy that smells like death and tastes like a dare. You'd probably trade a year of this slavery just to never sniff it again. Your mind flickers to the gods again. The Vikings believed in fate weird, and that even the gods couldn't change a man's destiny. For thralls, that destiny was grim and often short. You wonder with bitter irony if Odin himself cares about someone like you. Probably not. The sun rises higher, and the cold cuts through your soaked clothes like knives. You row. You suffer. You live, if only barely. Because this is your world now, the endless punishing rhythm of the Viking slave. The smell hits you before you see it. A pungent wave of decay mixed with salt and sweat. You're shoved below deck into the cramped, dark belly of the ship. The air is thick, barely breathable, filled with the sour stench of rotting fish heads and old bread crusts left to fester in the damp corners. Your stomach twists. This is what Viking meals mean to thralls' scraps, that even the ship's dogs might turn their noses up at. You bite down on the gag as a wave of nausea rises. Your fingers scrape over the rough wood as you settle into your corner muscles, trembling from exhaustion and hunger. Around you others, slaves like you, curl into themselves, eyes hollow, or burning with silent rage. There's no dignity here, just the desperate hope that the next meal won't poison you, or that sickness won't claim you before the next raid. You chew on a stale piece of bread, dry and crumbly. No butter, no honey, no anything that would soften the harshness. Vikings themselves prized fermented fish and hardtack, but their slaves got the leftovers. The leftovers of leftovers. If you're lucky, maybe some dried cod scraps tossed your way. Lucky is a relative term when you're trapped in this dark coffin on the sea. Here's a grim fact. Archaeological digs of Viking shipwrecks and settlements often find remnants of food that slaves consumed, usually coarse grains, fish remains, and the occasional wild berry. Thralls' diets were poor, leading to malnutrition and a high rate of illness. Now, for a quirky detail, Vikings sometimes flavored their bread with juniper berries or nettles, plants believed to have medicinal properties. But thralls. Your bread is plain, sometimes even mixed with ash or sand to stretch the dough. Not exactly a gourmet experience. Historians debate how much thralls ate compared to free Vikings. Some argue slaves were deliberately starved to keep them weak and obedient. Others think it was just the harsh reality of limited resources on long voyages. You shift your weight, wincing as your ribs protest. The food, or lack thereof, leaves you weak. You can't help but wonder how much longer your body can endure. Hunger gnaws deeper than the chains. And then there's the rats. These furry little devils run rampant under the deck, scavenging every crumb, and sometimes nibbling on exposed skin. You know the stories, rats spreading disease, gnawing at sleeping thralls, even biting off toes if you're too still or too weak. You've seen it happen. Yet oddly enough, some Vikings believed rats were a kind of blessing, a sign of the ship's luck and prosperity. It's a cruel joke when those blessings make your nights a waking nightmare. The thralls whisper in their broken tongues, sharing tales of sickness and survival. One claims to have seen a fellow slave eaten alive by rats after collapsing from exhaustion. You swallow hard, trying not to dwell on the horror. Meanwhile, the free Vikings feast above, drinking mead and swapping tales of conquest. Your stomach twists in bitter jealousy. Your world is dirt sweat and the ever-present fear that the next bite might be your last, or your undoing. A question lingers in your mind. How did thralls mentally survive this daily torment? Some historians suggest small acts of rebellion or secret camaraderie kept spirits flickering. Others believe most simply gave in to despair. As you lay back, the stale breadcrumbs falling from your fingers, you realize one thing with terrible clarity. Survival here isn't just about strength. It's about enduring the slow death of hunger, humiliation, and hopelessness. Night descends like a heavy shroud, swallowing the ship in a cold, suffocating darkness. Below deck, where you've spent the day, the air grows colder and more suffocating. The wooden walls creak and groan with the waves pounding. But the real menace skitters just out of sight, the rats. These little beasts, eyes gleaming in the gloom, dart across your skin and nibble with impunity on any exposed flesh. You curl into yourself trying to protect your aching limbs, but their tiny teeth find cracks biting at your heels, your fingers, your toes. You shiver not just from the cold, but from the creeping fear that these vermin might be the least of your problems tonight. The Vikings above laugh and drink, their voices booming like thunder. You remember the day's brutal work, the endless rowing, the rotten meals. Now you're prey, not only to your captors, but to the wild creatures that have made this ship their domain. Here's a surprising fact. Viking ships were notorious rat havens. Archaeologists found evidence that rats often cohabited the ships alongside humans, sometimes in terrifying numbers. Their presence wasn't just a nuisance, it was a constant source of disease and discomfort. But here's the twist. Some Vikings considered rats good luck, believing that their presence meant a successful voyage. A bizarre superstition when you're the one the rats choose as a midnight snack. You try to steady your breathing, feeling the tickle of whiskers on your skin. The thralls around you whisper dark jokes about rat kings, clusters of rats whose tails tangle into a twisted knot rumored to be an ill omen or even a sign of witchcraft. Historians still debate whether these rat kings were natural phenomena or myth, but for you, the idea only adds to the eerie atmosphere. The darkness thickens, and with it, the isolation. You feel the sharp edge of loneliness slicing through your bones, the knowledge that no one above deck will hear your silent pleas. Your captors sleep soundly, their snores echoing like drums of doom. At times, you think of your own gods or ancestors, wondering if they watch over you, or simply turned their backs long ago. You clutch a small rough stone you found earlier, an odd keepsake, but something to hold on to in this abyss. Sleep is a distant hope. The rat's relentless gnawing, the damp chill, and the rough wood pressing into your skin make rest impossible. You close your eyes for a moment, and the vision of open fields, fresh air, and freedom flickers like a dying candle. And yet, despite the darkness, there's a strange camaraderie among the thralls. Quiet nods, shared warmth, small acts of defiance like hiding scraps or telling forbidden stories keep a fragile hope alive. You wonder if any of this will matter when the ship docks, when you're sold traded, or worse. Historians still argue whether slaves' experiences were uniform or varied widely, depending on their masters and locations. Either way, the common thread is suffering. The ship creaks again, the sea rocking your world as the rats continue their nightly feast. You grit your teeth, praying for dawn, but fearing what it will bring. You wake to a cold slap of reality, not a gentle sunrise, but the thunderous voice of a Viking yelling about gods and curses. Worship is no choice here. It's a command. You're dragged onto the deck, shoved before a towering figure who barks orders while clutching a crude wooden idol. The god is Odin, fierce and demanding eyes like fire. You're expected to bow, chant, maybe even offer a token, anything to prove you accept their Norse faith. Refusal means punishment. No parties, no mercy. Forced worship is more than show. It's control. These gods embody war fate and death, and their approval supposedly keeps the ship safe. You're a pawn in a divine game, a living sacrifice in the eyes of your captors. You mumble the strange words, clumsy and foreign, your throat dry and heart pounding. It's a charade, but a necessary one. Defiance here isn't just disrespect, it's a death sentence. Here's a historical nugget. Vikings believed deeply in wired fate's unchangeable thread, weaving every life into an inevitable tapestry. Thralls, Ashau souls were seen as the lowest thread, often considered doomed by birth. Some sagas mention slaves secretly invoking other gods or spirits, but that's whispered legend, more than fact. And here's a quirky twist. Some Viking slaves reportedly practiced their own religions in secret, or blended beliefs, incorporating charms and rituals from their homelands. Archaeologists find odd artifacts in slave quarters, hinting at hidden faiths, but interpretations remain uncertain. Did these tiny acts of spiritual rebellion offer solace, or were they doomed to fail? Historians debate if thralls were genuinely expected to worship Norse gods, or if this was mainly a show for the free folk. The truth probably shifts with time and place, but either way, your spiritual freedom is as chained as your body. You glance around. A fellow slave clutches a crude amulet, its meaning lost, but its comfort real. You envy that small piece of hope. The gods above don't seem to care much about you, but maybe the ones below do. As the sun climbs, the crew prepares for the next task, leaving you with the bitter taste of forced piety. You wonder if any of this divine devotion will change your fate, or if the gods are as indifferent as the sea. The slightest misstep, the faintest hesitation, and suddenly you're the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. The Vikings waste no time reminding you who holds the reins. You're dragged out, hands bound tighter than ever, and forced to the ship's post. There, with the cold wind whipping your face and the salt spray stinging your skin, the punishment begins. A brutal flogging, sharp lashes cutting into your flesh echoes like thunder across the deck. You grit your teeth, trying to choke back the pain. But it's not just the physical agony, it's the humiliation. The crew gathers round, watching with twisted fascination, some laughing, others shouting crude encouragements. You're less than a man here, a spectacle to entertain or terrify. One wrong look, one missed order, and you're reminded that suffering is part of your daily routine. Here's a harsh fact. Vikings used whipping, binding, and sometimes even mutilation as punishment for thralls. Unlike free men who might be fined or banished, slaves endured corporal punishment that could scar or kill. These punishments served not just to discipline, but to assert dominance and control. Oddly, some Vikings believed that punishing slaves harshly was a way to keep the ship's luck intact. Bad behavior might anger the gods or invite disaster. This belief added a layer of ritual to cruelty. Historians debate whether Viking slaves were ever tried in courts or had any legal protections. Some sagas mentioned thralls being punished for serious crimes, but mostly they were at their master's mercy, bound by fear and violence. You close your eyes as the lashes fall again, counting the seconds until it's over, wishing the sea would swallow you whole. Your body aches, every nerve screaming, but your mind stays alert because showing weakness could mean worse things: a beating, a longer chain, or being sold to a harsher master. After the flogging, you're thrown back below deck, trembling, soaked in salt and sweat. The crew's laughter follows you like a cruel song. You press your bruised side against the cold wood, trying to find a shred of dignity amid the pain. As you lie there, you remember the faces of fellow slaves who broke under such punishment. Some never got back up. The fear of pain is a constant shadow, sharper than any blade. And yet somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of defiance flickers. The thought that maybe, just maybe, you won't break completely. That one day this nightmare might end. The morning sun barely peeks over the horizon when you're dragged bruised and bleeding to the slave market, an open-air circus of misery. The smell hits you immediately, sweat, fear, and the sharp tang of blood mingling with livestock and freshly baked bread. Traders hawk their goods with crude enthusiasm, voices rising over the chaos. You're prodded forward like a sack of grain, stripped of dignity and hope. Buyers eye you up and down, whispering about your strength, your health, your usefulness. You realize you're less a person here, and more a commodity to be priced and sold. The market is a spectacle. Children gawk, women clutch their cloaks tighter, and men nod or shake their heads, imagining how they'd break your spirit to fit their needs. Some buyers are brutal, others calculating, but none see you as anything but property. The crowd's energy is a twisted mix of greed and cruelty. A brutal fact. Viking slave markets were vital economic hubs where thralls were traded, gifted, or ransomed. Prices varied wildly based on age, health skills, and origin. Some slaves fetched high prices as skilled laborers or household servants, but most were valued only for brute strength or obedience. Here's a weird fact. Some Viking slaves were used as thrall wives to produce more slaves, their marriages arranged without consent. The idea of love or family meant little here. Breeding was business. Historians debate the frequency and scale of Viking slave markets. Some suggest they were common and well organized. Others think smaller and sporadic. But there's no doubt these markets were brutal places where human lives were bartered like cattle. As you stand exposed on the platform, a buyer steps forward, a burly man with scars and a crooked smile. He runs a hand over your arm, judging your muscles, your scars, your spirit. You want to shrink away, to disappear, but your chains hold you fast. The man mutters a price. Too high for you, too low for pride. You realize this is the start of a new kind of captivity, and with fresh torment and new masters. Your mind flashes back to the ship's deck, to the flogging. The rat bites the stale bread. Now you're entering a fresh hell, one that might last your lifetime. Yet even here in this bleak marketplace, you catch a glimmer of something unexpected. A whispered promise of escape. A rumor shared among thralls about a hidden path, a crack in the cruel system. maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's just the start of something else. The night wraps around you like a cold shroud as your whispered plans take shape. A daring escape, reckless but tantalizing. You move quietly, muscles still aching, heart pounding like a war drum in your chest. Every shadow hides a threat. Every footstep might be the last you take free. The sea's distant roar mingles with the crackling fire of torches, casting flickering light on the cruel world you're desperate to leave behind. You clutch a makeshift knife stolen from a careless guard, a thin blade barely more than a shard, but enough. Your fellow thralls nod in silent agreement, eyes bright with a dangerous hope. It's foolhardy, almost certainly fatal, but the alternative is endless chains and despair. Tonight, you risk it all. Here's a harsh truth. Very few Viking slaves ever escaped successfully. The seas were vast, the lands unknown, and your captors ruthless in their pursuit. Yet stories survive of thralls who vanished into forests or distant lands, becoming free men by sheer will and luck. A quirky detail, some runaway slaves disguised themselves by tattooing over their marks or wearing stolen clothing. Others relied on the kindness of strangers or their own cunning to survive. It was a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with death. Historians still debate how organized these escape attempts were. Some believe slaves acted alone, others that secret networks of aid existed. Either way, the risks were colossal. You slip from your quarters, every sound amplified in your ears. The cold night air bites through your threadbare clothes, but adrenaline shields you from numbness. You dodge sleeping guards, slip past crates, and finally reach the side of the ship. Your fingers find a rope ladder dangling over the waves. One by one, you and your companions descend into the dark sea below. The icy water shocks your body, but freedom tastes sweeter than any warmth. As you swim toward the shadowed shore, the moonlight glints off the distant figures shouting from the deck, your pursuers. You kick harder, heart-hammering lungs screaming for air. The forest's edge beckons like a promise. This is the moment, life or death, freedom or chains, and maybe, just maybe, you'll live to see another dawn. Now the storm of your escape fades like a distant thunder, replaced by the gentle hush of night's soft breath. Imagine the quiet whisper of leaves brushing against your skin, the cool earth beneath your fingertips, and the endless sky above, vast, forgiving, free. The chains loosen in your mind as you float between shadow and light, the horrors of the day dissolving into a tranquil dreamscape. Let your heart slow, your muscles relax, and your thoughts drift like feathers on a breeze. You are safe now, far from the dark decks and biting rats. Rest here in this fragile peace, and carry with you the faint flicker of hope glowing softly against the night. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the heavy boots of a Roman legionary soldier, waking to a world where discipline is as sharp as your gladius, and comfort is a distant dream. You jerk awake, muscles stiff and sore, the cold dawn air biting at your skin beneath your armor. Around you the camp stirs, clanging metal shouted orders, the rhythmic pounding of boots on packed earth. Your comrades move like clockwork, each motion precise and practiced, while you try not to trip over your own tired limbs. You're about to spend the day marching, training, and sweating under a sun that never seems kind. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop your location and time down below. I want to know who's braving the life of a legionary with me tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes squint against the pale morning light as the camp wakes around you. The clatter of armor and the sharp bark of the centurion's voice slice through the chill air. Ad Victoriam, someone shouts a rallying cry that's equal parts encouragement and threat. You're snapped into action. There's no time for morning stretches or coffee. The Legion demands discipline and readiness at every moment. The day begins with the dreaded drill. You march in formation, boots pounding the ground in unison, with hundreds of others, the dust rising like a cloud of ghosts trailing your steps. The centurion's voice drills commands correcting the smallest misstep. Falter and face a shout, or worse, a lash from the vine staff. Roman discipline is legendary for a reason. Here's a solid fact. The Roman army was one of the most disciplined fighting forces in history, with punishments for disobedience, ranging from extra duties to brutal beatings. A soldier's life was structured harsh and unforgiving. But here's a quirky twist. Some legionaries believed carrying a small phallus charm called a fascisinus warded off evil and bad luck. A little awkward in the morning drill, but hey, superstition was part of survival. Historians still argue how much of the discipline was enforced by fear, and how much by camaraderie and pride. Either way, the line between order and chaos was razor thin. You swallow your pride and fall in line, feeling the weight of your armor press down like a second skin. The leather straps creak and the metal plates clang softly. Your shield feels heavy in your arm, but it's an extension of you now, a lifeline in the brutal dance of battle. Around you, comrades move with practiced ease, faces grim but focused. You catch a glimpse of the cook nervously balancing pots of porridge, while others check their weapons or tighten straps. The camp's pulse beats strong and relentless. The centurion's voice rises again, pushing you forward. There's no room for weakness. You march, you obey, you endure. And so the day begins, grueling, demanding, unforgiving, the life of a Roman legionary soldier. You roll out of your scratchy wool blanket and stumble toward the camp's cooking fire, the smell of burnt wood and simmering porridge filling the chilly morning air. Your stomach grumbles, but breakfast is hardly a feast, just a bowl of thick, lukewarm porridge mixed with bits of stale bread. The Legion's diet isn't about indulgence. It's about fuel cheap and filling enough to keep hundreds of soldiers moving day after day. You munch silently, your mouth dry from yesterday's march and last night's restless sleep. Around you, other soldiers scrape their bowls clean, grumbling about the never-ending monotony of army rations. Still, this humble meal has kept the Roman legions fed for centuries. Here's a concrete fact. Roman soldiers were issued a daily ration of roughly 2 pounds of wheat or barley, often ground into pulse-a-thick porridge supplemented by vegetables, cheese, and sometimes salted pork. It was basic, repetitive, but surprisingly nutritious. Now for a quirky fringe fact, some legionaries reportedly took to flavoring their bland meals with fish sauce called garum, a pungent condiment made from fermented fish guts. Imagine starting your day with that smell wafting over the campfire. Historians still argue how varied the diet really was on campaign, with some evidence showing more diversity, depending on location supply lines and local resources. Either way, it wasn't a gourmet spread. After swallowing the last gritty mouthful, it's time for chores. The camp doesn't clean itself, and you're expected to help scrubbing your armor till it gleams, repairing leather straps, and yes, digging the dreaded latrines. There's no escaping the smell or the hard labor, even when blisters bloom on your hands. You grip your sponge and scrub methodically, the sweat mixing with dirt and grime on your skin. The centurion passes by, nodding with barely concealed impatience. "Perfect armor, perfect discipline," he mutters, and you nod back, hoping your efforts are enough to keep the lash at bay. Here's a grim fact. Legionaries spent hours each day maintaining their equipment, crucial for survival. Poorly maintained armor or weapons could mean death in battle. Oddly, some soldiers decorated their shields with bizarre symbols, gods, animals, or even caricatures to intimidate foes or simply amuse themselves. One legionary even painted a giant phallus on his shield, blending superstition and humor. Historians still debate how much downtime soldiers had for such personalization. But these small acts of individuality seem to have been an important morale boost. As the sun climbs higher, you finish your chores, muscles already aching. The next phase of the day awaits hours of weapons practice and mastering formations that might save your life or end it. You glance around at the camp, bustling with soldiers, animals, and slaves. The rhythm of life here is harsh, but strangely orderly, a fragile balance between chaos and control. You brace yourself. The drill is far from over. The midday sun beats down mercilessly as you step onto the dusty training grounds, sweat already trickling beneath your helmet. Today's lesson weapons practice and formation drills. You grip your gladius, the short, brutal sword designed for stabbing, and your scutum, the curved shield that's your lifeline in battle. Around you, fellow legionaries line up boots, stamping the earth, shields raised, ready to become a moving wall of death. The centurion barks orders, pushing you to perfect the testudo, the tortoise formation. You lock your shields overhead, and on the sides creating a nearly impenetrable shell. The weight is crushing. Your arms tremble under the strain. Dust swirls in the air, mixing with sweat and the sharp scent of metal. Every movement must be flawless. Hesitation means disaster. Here's a cold fact. The testudo was an iconic Roman tactic enabling soldiers to advance under a hail of arrows or sling stones. But holding the formation required intense discipline and strength. One weak link could spell doom. On a lighter note, legionaries sometimes practiced with wooden swords before graduating to real steel, sparing themselves from cuts but not the bruises. Training was no picnic. Historians still debate how often the testudo was used in real battle. Some argue it was a battlefield staple. Others believe it was more ceremonial or situational. You thrust your gladius forward, imagining the sharp sting of it piercing enemy flesh. Nearby, a soldier accidentally knocks his helmet off, sending it clanging across the ground. The centurion's glare could have frozen lava. No mistakes here. Between drills, you swap jokes and stories, morale is fragile, and humor is a welcome balm. One soldier boasts about a recent victory, while another grumbles about the blister forming under his foot. It's a brotherhood forged in hardship. As the day drags on, blisters multiply, muscles scream, and the relentless sun beats down. You wonder how long you can endure this endless cycle of sweat and steel. Did you know Roman soldiers were sometimes tattooed with marks indicating their legion, a constant reminder of their identity and loyalty? The camp bell finally signals a break, and you slump against a tree, exhausted but alive, ready to face the next grueling march. Your boots thud relentlessly against the cracked earth, the dust swirling in the heat, as your century marches in near-perfect formation. The road stretches ahead, unyielding and endless, a ribbon of hardship leading to who knows where. Your feet are raw, beneath worn Caligay blisters, bursting with every pounding step. Sweat drips down your brow, mixing with the grime on your face and neck. The sun scorches mercilessly, and the only sound is the rhythmic pounding of hundreds of soldiers moving as one. You feel every muscle scream, your breath ragged but steady. The standard-bearer marches ahead, his vexillum fluttering in the breeze, a symbol of your unit's pride and a beacon to follow. Falling out of line means punishment, or worse. The centurion's sharp voice slices through the air, reminding you to keep pace. Here's a hard fact. Roman legions often marched over 20 miles a day, carrying heavy packs filled with weapons, armor, food, and tools. These forced marches were grueling tests of endurance and discipline. Now, for a curious detail, legionaries carried a dolabra, a versatile tool that was part pickaxe, part axe, used not only for combat, but also for digging fortifications along the march. Talk about multitasking. Historians still argue how often legions engaged in these forced marches before battle, versus traveling by ship or other means. But the consensus is clear. The grind of the march was an unavoidable part of soldier life. As you trudge onward, you think about the camp waiting at the end of this grueling day, the tents, the meager rations, and the hard-earned rest. But rest is never guaranteed. There's always a skirmish on the horizon, a threat lurking in the wilderness. Your mind drifts to the strange camaraderie that forms among your comrades. Shared songs, whispered stories, and quiet moments of laughter that punctuate the brutal routine. It's the thread that keeps you sane. Still, the march presses on, and with every pounding step you feel the weight of the empire on your shoulders, heavy, relentless, and inescapable. You collapse into the dusty camp like a sack of broken bones, muscles screaming in protest, but there's no time to rest. The air buzzes with activity, soldiers swearing slaves hauling water, and the sharp clang of blacksmiths hammering on glowing metal. Your tent is cramped, a flimsy refuge from the chaos outside. Inside, comrades share what little food remains, swapping stories and grim jokes to chase away the creeping dread. You unwrap your bread and hard cheese, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that won't quit. The rations are meager, the same every day, but sharing them creates a fragile bond. You listen as others complain about the march, the endless drills, the hunger, but beneath the grumbles is an unspoken loyalty, a brotherhood forged in hardship. Here's a solid fact: Roman legionaries lived in tightly packed camps called castra, which were marvels of military engineering, complete with walls, roads, and organized tents. They were designed to be defensible and efficient, but life inside was often noisy and uncomfortable. Oddly, some soldiers kept small pets like birds or mice to remind them of home, or as lucky charms. A little comfort in the harshest conditions. Historians debate how much downtime soldiers really had. Some suggest long stretches of boredom punctuated by intense bursts of activity. Either way, camp life was a mix of monotony and tension. As evening falls, the campfire flickers and voices lower. You hear whispers about distant battles, rumors of promotions, and the ever-present fear of the unknown. Sleep is elusive, haunted by memories of previous fights and the uncertainty of what tomorrow will bring. Outside your tent, the sounds of night shift guards echo a reminder that even in rest, vigilance never sleeps. You close your eyes, muscles aching, heart heavy, but still beating. You wonder how much longer you can endure this cycle of brutal marches, endless drills, and fragile moments of camaraderie before the weight breaks you. Suddenly the calm shatters. The distant clash of weapons, the roar of battle, and the stench of fear flood the camp. You're jolted from the uneasy comfort of camp life into the violent chaos of a skirmish. Hearts hammer, blood pumps adrenaline, and you scramble to arm yourself, the gladius cold in your hand, as you prepare to fight or die. The enemy charges a wave of fury and desperation. Your shield raises instinctively, a solid barrier against spears and arrows. You stab forward, the brutal efficiency of Roman training, kicking in, thrust, parry, retreat, repeat. Time slows and accelerates simultaneously. You feel the shock of impact, the taste of dirt and sweat, the roar of comrades and foes alike. Here's a gritty fact: Roman soldiers trained relentlessly for close combat, mastering formations and weapons to deadly effect. Their discipline often turned the tide in seemingly impossible battles. On the stranger side, some legionaries believed that licking their weapons before battle brought good luck or divine favor. Not the most sanitary ritual, but superstition was a shield of its own. Historians still debate the accuracy of some ancient battle accounts, whether these were glorified victories or brutal struggles where chaos often ruled. You catch a glimpse of a comrade falling, blood dark and thick. Panic threatens to seize you, but training holds your hand steady. Fight, survive, repeat, that's the unspoken rule. As the battle ebbs, you stand, panting, limbs trembling, heart pounding like a war drum. The skirmish might be over, but the scars it leaves, seen and unseen, will last much longer. The sun sinks low, and the camp smells of smoke, sweat, and iron. You wonder how many more battles you can endure before your body or spirit finally breaks. The taste of victory is bittersweet as you limp back to camp, wounds stinging, and throat raw from shouting commands and curses. The medics, grizzled veterans with tired eyes, work swiftly cleaning cuts and tying off gashes with strips of cloth. Their tools are crude bone needles, sharpened bronze knives, and a suspiciously foul-smelling ointment that promises healing, but might just be herbal guesswork. You grit your teeth as the healer probes a nasty infection creeping along a deep cut. Without proper care, infection could mean death, even in a victorious camp. You count your blessings, this wound isn't fatal, but it's a reminder of how fragile your existence is. Here's a harsh fact: Roman military medicine was surprisingly advanced for its time, with field hospitals called valetudinaria, but many soldiers still died from infections or untreated injuries. Oddly, some remedies included bizarre ingredients like crushed beetles or boiled animal dung, hard to swallow literally, but sometimes effective. Historians still argue how widespread and effective Roman medical care truly was. Some believe it saved countless lives, while others think many soldiers succumbed to preventable wounds. As you sit by the fire, bandaged and aching, you overhear stories of soldiers who lost limbs, but returned to fight, testament to the harsh resilience demanded by the legion. Despite the pain, there's a grim camaraderie in shared suffering. Your comrades exchange jokes about their battle scars, each mark a badge of survival and endurance. You close your eyes briefly, the crackling fire, and distant night sounds mingling with your throbbing pulse. Tomorrow promises more marches, more drills, and perhaps more battles. But for now, you rest wounded, weary, but still standing. The camp is cloaked in darkness, but sleep remains elusive as you stand watch beneath a star-studded sky. The cold night air bites through your tunic, and the distant hoot of owls mingles with the occasional rustle of leaves. Your hands grip your spear tightly, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the flickering campfires. Every sound could be friend or foe, and your senses are stretched thin, fighting exhaustion with sheer willpower. The night watch is a relentless test, not just of vigilance, but of mental endurance. The world around you feels vast and empty, yet full of lurking dangers. Your thoughts drift memories of home, of laughter of simpler times, but you push them aside. There's no room for weakness here. A stark fact, Roman soldiers often stood night watches in rotating shifts, sometimes going days, with little rest. Their exhaustion a constant threat to survival. Here's a quirky detail. Some legionaries carried small charms or amulets for protection during their watches. Tiny figures of gods or animals tucked beneath their armor. Whether these helped or not is anyone's guess. Historians still debate how effective night watches truly were, given the frequency of surprise attacks. But the practice was a vital part of camp life. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the weight of responsibility keeps you upright. You remember the mummified cat from a distant tomb you once heard about. How even in death it guarded its domain. You'd give anything for such steadfastness now. The camp slowly quiets, the only sounds your breath, and the faint rustling of fabric as others settle into their uneasy slumber. You lean on your spear, letting the stars and night's soft whispers ease your weary mind. Tomorrow promises more hardships, but tonight you stand guard, a silent sentinel in the vast Roman world. Now let your breath slow and deepen the steady rhythm, matching the gentle night around you. Imagine the soft glow of distant fires, flickering shadows dancing slowly on ancient stones. Your muscles relax, the aches fading into a warm, soothing haze. The weight of armor and duty melts away as your thoughts drift like feathers on a gentle breeze. Here beneath the vast, unending sky, find your peace. Tomorrow is uncertain, but tonight is yours. Quiet, calm, and softly enveloping. Rest easy. Soldier, the Empire sleeps, and so can you. Sweet dreams.